bad was the education that I spent the first 4 weeks when I went back to public school, because I went to a Montessori elementary school, went into this private school, and then for the first 4 weeks after starting back at public school for high school, I spent 4 weeks before school started in tutoring for geography and biology because I was behind.
Ooh.
And I made it out easy. So I'm ready to get started.
Okay. All right, hi, welcome to my channel. My name is DJ Ghetto Steve, and welcome back if you've been here before. We are continuing our conversations with homeschool graduates and talking about our educational experiences. So welcome, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for rescheduling. I just
Absolutely.
fell off my brain. But
What did your school day look like while you were homeschooled?
so it was private school, and
Mm-hmm.
we used a Becca curriculum.
Aha.
And that's why I was like, oh, everyone else who's responding to this, they are doing homeschool, but it was private school. So sixth grade was still considered elementary,
Okay.
which meant we started the day, all the elementary K through 12 or K through 6. We would do the Pledge of Allegiance, Pledge to the Christian flag, and Pledge to the Bible, which
Yes.
made me want to vomit. And I was okay. So I was raised half Jewish. My dad's Jewish, and half Church of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
which my dad was half Church of Christ. So it was just the most bizarre upbringing because the Christianity and the Judaism did not inform each other at all. And so when I went to this, it was a Nazarene school, and there were certain things I would share, and then they would be like, oh, so Passion Week and like Passover, it goes together. And I didn't know what Passion Week was because in the Church of Christ we didn't celebrate Easter or Christmas.
Ah.
So it was just this really bizarre conglomeration. And when I got to this school, and really it was my first and only encounter with true evangelical Christianity, because the Church of Christ was not, you know, institutional in any way. And
Right.
so I realized that there are all these expectations that evangelicals have. That it was just this whole insular Christian culture. And it was all just really bizarre to me. And I spent every minute of it, and I guess a theological outsider. I had my friends and my group. My grade was actually the biggest when we were in middle school. There were nearly 30 of
Wow.
us.
Okay.
So, it dwindled, of course, after middle school, and it was pretty settled. Like the student group was settled
Mm-hmm.
after they started high school, but there was just not a single thing about that I liked. I was I was singled out by a lot of teachers. I was made to do things that made me uncomfortable. When we got to middle school, 7th through 12th grade, there would be spring and fall revivals.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what a revival was. I
Oh
didn't know what the
no.
point was. I thought it was Nazarene school, so holiness movement.
Mm-hmm.
And, the speakers would be, just like by the end of it, screaming into the microphone. And, a lot of the students would go up to the prayer altar. And, I remember distinctly 8th grade, it was me and this other girl who was also Church of Christ in the middle school side. And on the other side, my brother, who was in high school, was the only one. So there were only 3 of us still sitting in our chairs, and they forced us to go up to the prayer altar. And I wanted the earth to just swallow me up and die. And the worst part is that I was a lesbian and I didn't know it.
Oh
And
no.
so my God, there were just a couple of of the high schoolers that I thought were cute. There was a teacher I had a crush on. And this really strange thing happened. I'm so sorry if this is too much, but I had this for the longest time, a conflation of like, oh, I want this person's attention. And I thought I just wanted them to be like Christians or whatever. So I was like, oh, I
Right.
hope this really hot teacher comes and prays over me. But like, I didn't know that that's what I, it was just like, I wanted their attention, and that's what it looked like in that school. So it was the most bizarre experience of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that I'm like, was this a thing? Did this exist? So I had to go to Half Price Books. My partner, she went
Oh,
to one. Um, but Half Price Books is an awesome place to go get homeschooling curriculum.
yes.
Obviously, it's so you can make it affordable and you can homeschool. But I see it as saving my community from having these texts. So this is the one that I chose. They didn't have a ton of middle school curriculum. Mostly it's elementary, because a lot of times when people homeschool, I learned they do the elementary and then they go somewhere else if,
Right.
parents are good. So this was my first sixth grade reader, Mountain Pathways. And I'm hoping to go get more. My partner even said, well, tell the person you're talking to that if you need more primary sources, I just need a reason to go get more. And I mean, it's a whole thing. So yeah, it was really bizarre. It was so strange to me.
So on that note, let me show you the Bill Gothard books that I have been getting. So,
Oh,
I have, let's see, this is the men's manual. I have volumes 1 and 2 of the men's manual. I also have the advanced seminar textbook and the basic seminar textbook and the character sketches.
so is that from Pensacola Christian College, or is that a Becca?
That's Institute in Basic Life Principles.
Ooh, IBLP. Okay, that's the
Yes,
scourge of Duggars. All right, all right. I'm up on my Fundy
correct.
Friday.
So since you had more of a school, classroom environment, how did you feel just generally about the curriculum? Like, were there problematic topics or perspectives? Did you feel like there were any educational gaps?
So yes, and this is the time in my life where like middle school is a very formative
Mm-hmm.
period. And I really, when I look at because I ended up going to college, I majored in religion,
Ah,
you know, because it informed everything after. And it was the clear delineation. There was my childhood, and there was after NCA, and then there was the fever dream of this school. So the gap, so like I said, I had to go in for tutoring for about a month when I went to public school, because in Texas in ninth grade you learn geography.
mm-hmm.
I did not learn geography at this school that I went to. So things as basic as landforms, like I didn't know that. Physical geography, the demographics. Everything we did at the school I went to was from a Christian perspective, or
Right.
through a biblical lens. But that, I mean, as I'm sure you can imagine, that does not lend itself to a complete education on, world history, US history. I mean, as far as they were concerned, US history started when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And in seventh grade, we did not use a Becca for history, because in Texas, you're required to do Texas history.
Okay.
So fortunately, now we did skip the first chapter that was prehistoric, because the earth didn't exist 10,000 years ago.
Oh no, not at all.
Certainly there was no, society. So we skipped that, but blessedly didn't use a Becca. So sixth and eighth grade, my eighth grade US history book said, and I will never forget this. This is part of the reason I was like did I make this up in my head? And no, I didn't. Really ugly. God used the trail of tears to lead the Indians to Christ. And my dad's heritage includes Eastern Band Cherokee, where, my ancestors, who were both adopted by the tribe or their parents or whatever, were adopted by the tribe because they were all orphaned, and then they married each other, and they hid. When they got to adulthood, having been raised in the tribe, they never registered for the rolls. They hid in the mountains, and they stayed in North Carolina. So, I was trying to track that heritage a while ago. It's like, I never found my names on the rolls, but it was, I looked at the family documentation, adopted, hid, and weren't removed. So, knowing that was part of my family lore, and that, such a horrific thing that my however many greats, grandmother and grandfather, avoided, and probably had to watch their adoptive grandparents, or I don't remember who was adopted, but that trauma, knowing that was part of my story, and then hearing it be treated like it was a good thing, like that never sat well with me, even though at the time I was still a creationist, biblical literalist. And so just, it was so blatantly racist.
Yeah.
There's, in this Mountain Pathways book, there's a story about a little girl living in Taiwan, and she was an orphan because the mean commies murdered her parents. Oh dear. Oh, that's actually not exactly what it was. She went to go find her parents, and it's the people who ran the orphanage were white people, and they just really took care of the poor little, East Asian kids whose life was ruined by the dirty commies of, 20th century China. And just, of course, none of that registered to me. I'm a raging leftist at this point.
Right.
But, none of that registered as something that was skewed, a lie. Just really, as from a historical perspective, just really propping up colonialism and imperialism as a religious necessity.
Yes.
And it was, they were all just missionaries. They weren't,
correct.
It wasn't literally military intervention. It was just missionaries. And I'm sure, are you familiar with Jesus Camp, the documentary? Yeah. So, there was this deleted scene. I'm obsessed with that documentary. I've seen it so many times, and it's probably why I ended up majoring in religion at my school.
Gotcha.
But there was a deleted scene where Tori's dad, it was before he was deployed. So they started filming before he deployed, and he's talking about what he thinks is his mission as a United States soldier in Iraq. And he was treating it like, no, he literally said verbatim, all expenses paid, mission trip.
Ooh.
Isn't that disgusting? And that is the culture of course, that was filmed in 2005, but right. The Christian conservative evangelicals, they never ever progressed past, this warmongering mindset, and it's so ugly. And
yeah. When you look,
and that was just history.
Yes, because when you look at a lot of the movements that have come through America, you have these very ecumenical, almost Unitarian type congregations that get together, and movements that get together, and they are very anti-war, very pro-immigrant, and all of that, and they get called not true Christians by the white Christian nationalist Christians. Right. And when you look at those basic commandments of love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, you're really not loving your neighbor when you're drone striking them. That just
Exactly.
isn't the thing. But I am also a raging leftist who is an incredible pacifist, and
Mm-hmm.
so I have my own biases there. Also, I want to plug my video about Baptist missions groups. We got a lot into the colonialist, colonizer mindset that is behind missions, and the way that a lot of remote indigenous tribes have been ruined, wiped out by disease, all in the effort of go into all the world and preach the gospel to every living creature. So there is some very harmful stuff in there when it comes to the colonizers and the rise of the moral majority, which turned into the white Christian nationalism, has really pushed that forward, and it is a struggle to be non-Christian in America. Now, Christians are not the super majority that they used to be, but
Thanks.
they are an extremely loud minority. And so they end up having what's the word? But having an influence that is greater than what their actual numbers are.
Mm-hmm.
And so we end up with all of these laws that are based on a particular brand of Christianity, and that is pushed through education and through culture and through corporate culture, through pushing capitalism. Like, we have all of these things that they wrap up in the Bible, but it's really not in there. The Bible is against interest on loans. So they're certainly against high interest credit cards, payday loans, etc. But no, we've got this capitalistic mindset underneath the Christian nationalism that just bowls forward in a china shop with these ideas of propping up the status quo and propping up the monopolies that have really taken over. And so I have hope for the future because Gen Z is not playing. But, granted, I've felt like this my entire adult life. So we're always in a weird place where we're constantly fighting for freedom. The old vets like to say, freedom isn't free. And that's true. And that's true for all of us, whether we're military or civilians. We all have to put something in order to get something out.
Mm-hmm. And you're really hitting on what was quite a bit of my focus when I would take my classes at my university and like history of religion in America. And like, I am an unabashed Jimmy Carter stan, and I just imagine what our world would look like if he had gotten a second term. But just the thing that one of the major issues with the Abeka curriculum is just the way they lie about the narrative of how America started, who came to the United States. Because you mentioned a lot of the Congregationalists, colonialists, and yes, colonizers. None of it was good.
Yeah.
But that was a systemic issue. The Abeka curriculum will have their impressionable young minds believe that it was one religion that came to America, one denomination of religion.
Yep.
Which I knew wasn't true because I had incredible parents who, through my childhood, I read the Dear America series. So, the Abeka would have you believe that it was, okay, the Pilgrims. Mm-hmm. They were Christians and they came to the United States. Okay, well, you talk about Pilgrims. Are you talking about the Separatists?
Yes.
Are you talking about the Puritans? Are you talking about the Congregationalists? Are you talking about the Quakers?
Yep.
And that's just off the top of my head. Each had astonishingly different ideals, different reasons for coming to America. The Huguenots, I don't know, they immigrated here. I'm just talking out my ass now. But like the religious, my professor, one of them at my university, she called it I think she called it the American religious quilt.
Yeah.
It's, one religion, sure, but there were just so many different, so many different flavors, and they all just had such vastly different ideals, different reasons for immigrating. And I mean, Abeka would just have you think that it was one entity escaping religious persecution in England. I'm sorry, have you met King Henry VIII? Are you familiar with the English religious landscape? Are you familiar with the Roman Empire? Are you familiar with the bastardization of the church? No, you're not. So, I mean, it just such a gross oversimplification of Christianity. I mean, that's such a disservice to the richness of the history of Christianity.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it's you get me talking about it, I'll never shut up. So, and that is, but all of that was just what was wrong with Abeka 8th grade history.
Yes.
And just so much. It's offensive. But I did, you mentioned that they have wormed their way into American politics. And I'll tell you what, is that where I live, there was a judge a couple months ago who ruled in favor of this Christian who's in charge of a company. And he didn't want to have to provide PrEP. He didn't want to have to provide birth control. And this judge ruled in their favor, saying that it was an undue burden on their religious practice. Well, in my ADHD hyperfocus, if I didn't have ADHD, I'd go to law school, but I just wouldn't be able to hack it. I'd rather be a troll. So I just wrote pages and pages and pages of, the judge was operating outside of jurisprudence because he was, it's showing a preference of this one particular iteration of Christianity who has these beliefs. And I mean, the judge, in doing that, in saying that it was a burden on Christianity, well, that's just him. That's a judge deciding what Christianity does and doesn't endorse. And there's no unified opinion. And you just can't do that. But, it's this preferential, systemic preferential treatment of this extremely conservative but extremely politically motivated faction of a religion that is just so much more diverse than the Christian nationalists would like it to be. And it's so ugly. And I just look at these people and I just think, what have you done? What are you doing? Like, this is just so far removed from, like, my favorite book in the Bible is Amos, because the OG prophet, one of the oldest texts in the biblical canon, and he is, I feel quite a bit of affinity for Amos, because he is just screaming at the leadership of Israel, saying, you pretend you want God when you're not doing well, then you get what you want, and you keep investing in these systems of power that oppress and hurt, and you want to work. God hates your worship. God hates what you're doing. And I just have to think, what Bible are these people reading that they write books like this? It's beyond comprehension. And I just have to hope that there is a God and there is a heaven. And when in the end, God gets what God wants, and that is going to feel like hell to these people. I don't believe in hell, but when systems of oppression are brought down, and when everything is made equal, people are going to be raised up, and people are going to be brought down. and that will feel like hell. And I just have to hope that that happens. But right now, I just feel like Amos sitting on the edge of society watching.
So much has been perverted, and they will cry about things being perverted, but they will say that about like accepting LGBT people, allowing divorce, understanding that bodily autonomy is important. Those are the perversions that they're worried about. Drag queens are the perversions that they're worried about. But what is actually happening is the good intentions as far as doing good for other man and whatnot are corrupted, because now they're basically doing it for, like, there's fake internet points. They're doing it for fake God points, and you
In
get into
pursuit
this
of power.
performative.
Yeah.
You show up on church every Sunday. If you're really good, you show up on Wednesday as well. You have a small group that you meet with once a month. You're reading your Bible every day. However, you are reading a specific version of the Bible that your particular church and group thinks is the most accurate. You're going to be using the pastor's sermons to kind of guide how you are interpreting things, and they don't recognize just how much is personal preference. They want to say that everything is simple to understand and that God's will is evident in everything around us. But if that is the case, then why are there literally like 500 different translations of the Bible that all have vastly different effects on the text itself? There's you go to like ATI curriculum, the IBLP wisdom booklets. In those, when you are talking about linguistics, you just learn a little bit of Greek. And not really enough Greek to actually understand Greek, just enough to be able to basically like identify the different letters.
Well, somewhere I have my Greek New Testament, but
oh, nice.
Yeah, so I had 4 semesters of college Greek. One of my research projects was about the, how mistranslation and reliance on Pauline texts that are more or less not authentic.
No.
Has led to the subjugation of women.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot of different definitions, whether it's not letting women pray out loud or whether that means the kind of abuse that goes on in the scourge of the IBLP and just everything that is exemplified in the Duggar family. That is all. I mean, one of my best friends just had a baby and they named their daughter Junia, which, you mentioned Greek. So in Romans 16, and Paul is giving his list of, thanks, and he mentions the apostles. The Greek is Junion, which is the accusative form. It's the last declension, direct object or whatever, and it's new. There's no gender associated with it, and so when people are translating the original text from Greek to Latin to English, and it was changed to the name Junion was changed to Junius. But when you review the literature, contemporary literature, that name doesn't exist. That's not a name. But you look at contemporary literature for the name Junia, that's a name. There are, outside of Pauline literature, uses of the name Junia. But because when the church was institutionalized, when they decided to, use the church to gain power, someone's got to be another. Then it was women, and they needed the text and manipulated the text to make it say that. And it's just so sad that from the moment Christianity was institutionalized, it was bastardized. And it has never been, has it borne good fruit?
Sure.
Yeah. In spite of the church. Not because of it.
Yeah.
Because of the teachings found inside, not because of established interpretations. And people, it's so sad that, people writing this curriculum, this Abeka curriculum, named after a woman, fake doctorate, but, it's not Christianity, but they really think it is because they've bought this lie. It's so ugly.
Yeah, it really is.
Got my medical Bible too.
Ooh, so, look at that.
If we do part 2, I've got all the text that they told me was important.
Yes.
Conspicuously untouched is a lot of text that I really like now. So,
well, it's been interesting because when I first deconstructed, I did it through Bible study. I was staying with my parents for a little while, and I was like, while I'm here, I'm going to use their study tools, their commentaries. I was like, I'm going to take all the information available to them, and I'm going to see what I can find in relationship to how God sees gay people. That was like my biggest struggle, my whole freaking childhood and adolescence, was struggling with this. I'm going to be a horrible person because I'm gay. And so I was like, I'm going to actually dig into the Bible and see what it says. And I even in the commentaries that were written in the 1970s, they did not address homosexuality, like at all. It was just not in there. And I got into a little bit of church and Bible history at that point, and I was like, oh, so it wasn't even until like 1954 when anyone attributed this stuff to homosexuality. And so I hit this major disillusionment point where I was like, I've been told so much stuff from the Bible for the last 18, 19 years. And then I'm actually doing the work to work out my faith in fear and trembling. And I am making a good faith effort to really understand what the original intent was. And I saw nothing of their condemnation in any of that. And I was like, okay, the church is not for me. Clearly, they have a very different way of looking at things. And, I've done a lot to try and reach out to people that are moderates, see if we can pull them over to the progressive side. But when it comes to people like my parents or a lot of my extended family, especially on my dad's side, there's not going to be me reaching out to them to try and change their views. I know exactly how fervent they are in their belief. And I'm just like, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this. And typically, I'm the kind of person that says, we can agree to disagree, but not when it invalidates someone's existence. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to this, it is such an emotionally fraught discussion that a lot of people just really are not willing to have. and it requires a good amount of introspection and being emotionally vulnerable to allow yourself to be wrong and to realize, oh, that thing that I have believed so firmly for so long is not correct. And we all have something like that we have to come to terms with as an adult. But it would be nice if I could have those conversations with my more fervent family. But I, with the help of my therapist, have gotten to a place where we're like, you know, pushing for these conversations. Is this healthy for us? Is this, you know, doing more to just further traumatize ourselves? Is it really useful? And so I've just gotten to where certain conversations are just not beneficial. And I believe it was Paul that said this, and it's one of the few things that I like Paul for. But he was saying that, you know, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are good for me. And I think that that is a really key point to make in boundary setting with people who believe differently with us, especially if they are family, because nobody wants to go no contact with their parents. Nobody wants to go no contact with a sibling. But at a certain point, you have to say, look, me interacting with you and the way that you show your judgment and whatnot is not healthy for me, and I'm not going to participate in it. So I'm going to step back. And it's something that I think probably every gay kid or queer kid that comes out of a Christian family ends up having to do, because there's typically not a lot of change that happens. There are absolutely some parents that have a gay kid or a trans kid come out to them and they're very religious, and yet they're like, no, you are my child. You understand who you are. I believe when you tell me who you say you are. And
That's my mom.
You know, and that's wonderful. I am, though, folks like you are so lucky. And I am really grateful that we have gotten to a place in our society where that is becoming more of the norm than the exception. It is, I had a new psychiatrist, and she was asking about my religious trauma and getting a timeline together. And she was like, I want to know when you came out, because you were born in the 80s. So 80s, 90s, 2000s, like those times make a big difference on when you came out. And I really appreciated her understanding on that. Since we've got that Christian queer kid thing going on, did you ever, I mean, probably not because you were born a little bit later than me, but did the ex-gay ministries get anywhere near you?
Oh no. Oh no. No, 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 no. And I love that for me. And it's also because when I was at this awful school for 3 years, and you know, I don't know why, but you know, middle school is when the class was the biggest and it had the most heathens. And so you know, just because of who my peers were during this time, fortunately I was exposed to normal, like Lady Gaga's Born This Way came out. We listened to that in the locker room. You know, Kesha's TikTok was a locker room song. So it's like, just because it was, you know, 2009, 2010, 2011, just the culture was different.
Yeah.
And just because of who was at the school at that time, it was definitely more secular. And you know, no one thinks, you know, no one in that faction of Christianity thinks that middle schoolers have a sexuality.
No.
So no one's trying to bring up ex-gay stuff to 12-year-olds, because you know, 12
They're
year
too young
olds
and innocent.
famously have no interest in things of that nature. So, no, I skirted that, and public high school is the best thing that ever happened to me. It was like, my parents were afraid I was going to get bullied because I had Tourette's, but I was actually pretty popular. So, I had broken by the time I recognized, oh, I'm gay. By the time I recognized that, I had already deconstructed that aspect. So I was very fortunate that I glided straight through. Because when I thought back when in middle school, I mean, we didn't talk about that either in class or anything. So I just guess I must have nebulously thought, oh, gay is a sin or whatever, but I just didn't think about it all that much.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
that's
I watched
good.
Rent in high school, and that's when must have been my sophomore year. I watched my mom was like, I recorded this music because I was a theater kid. She's like, I recorded this musical. It has most of the original Broadway cast. I think you'll really like it. And then whenever I became a Democrat after that, because I hadn't unpacked neoliberalism or anything. I was like, I'm a
Yes.
Democrat now. And she's like, you're 15. I was like, yeah, well, she was like, oh, I never should have shown you Rent.
Oh,
And I was
no.
like, did you know what it was when you told me I should watch it? And she did. I don't know, but it's almost like hearing people's stories makes you realize that it's not evil, horrible, wrong. But I never thought that. And I was never told that. So, very fortunate to have skirted that whole other kind of trauma.
Because as a fun aside, you had some Nazarene influences. James Dobson was actually a Nazarene preacher before he started Focus on the Family.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. Wow. I'm actually kind of impressed with the Nazarenes. I don't know what it's because my first exposure to women in ministry was at that school. And that was the first time I didn't know music in churches existed. I thought everyone sang a cappella until I went to this school and we had chapel on Wednesdays, and I was like, what is that? Then I learned I was the weird one, but whatever. I know how to sing because I was raised Church of Christ.
Exactly.
And yeah, no one else knows how
we
to
can sing harmony.
That. Oh, wow. Okay. Women in ministry is like cool. And I think that may have I'm not saying like that was the difference between like me falling down the Vanjie rabbit hole and, like retaining because I was confronted that the way I had been raised was not the norm and wasn't right. And so maybe that was the first thing I deconstructed, because that's what I was like, oh, well, it's okay because it's a kids minister, but that was never a thought that crossed my mind at all. And then, when I would actually talk to, because, it was a private school. So, the children's minister was also the band director, and the pastor's wife was the Bible teacher. And it's so, speaking to these women who were in these roles, and I had never been confronted with that ever. And I was like, I don't think I outright asked, why is this allowed? But that was the first time I learned that the way I was raised was not the only way to be, which is funny because the Church of Christ would just love it if you thought that was the only way to be. But that was probably the one thing that was good about going there, was that I learned about this whole other faction of conservative Christianity, which allowed me to learn, when I went to high school and I started reading, Rachel Held Evans and all these other, modern day saints of deconstruction, so I had learned early on in my formative years, it wasn't just Church of Christ. There's this whole other aspect of conservative Christianity. And I broke out of that. And there's all these other, and because it was such a slow burn, the deconstruction, I have never cared for militant atheists.
Yeah, I agree.
Do not. And, at this juncture, with, all my education, studying religion in college and research and all of that, I just can't, I just don't, it's not intellectually honest. I don't, so I can't vibe with that, which does make it really hard to, I guess, kind of find radical leftist, pro-religion
right
things, because a lot of people, while skiing down the black diamond of deconstruction, will smack a tree and not fully realize the end goal of deconstruction, which I don't know what that is, but
yeah, it's different for everyone. But
yeah,
in my romantic pursuits as an adult, I ended up marrying an atheist twice. And in both cases, when we were dating initially, it seemed like, they're like, yeah, they're still an atheist, but, they don't really care. It's not a big deal. But then I would be going through deconstruction, and so I would be consuming religious materials. I would want to talk about how I felt about faith and how it relates to myself. And I couldn't have those conversations with either of them because they would be like, faith, it's so stupid. Like, it's just wrong. You shouldn't do that. And I'm just like, okay, that is you.
The queer community, it's so sad because, okay, so the school I went to was, TCU. So just playing the college play, college, we got our...
Isn't that the horny toads?
Horn frogs, yeah! Well, okay, so the problem is twofold. One, we're at TCU. The Christians who go there are like, well, this isn't a Christian school because we don't have to go to chapel. We don't have to take Bible classes because you're required to take religion. But,
yeah.
And then the disciples students, because I, hung out with the disciples crowd. It was the gayest campus ministry, the gayest. And during my time at TCU, my freshman year, it was the Gay Straight Alliance, but they were all graduating. It was a terrible program. So my friends and I completely revamped it. We changed the name to Spectrum, and I was at the activities fair one year. It must maybe be my junior year. And I was, so they group all the activities. So the campus ministries are on one side, and my side of that was like the political, I guess, organizations. And so my table, Spectrum, Gay Straight Alliance, or the gay table, we had a pride flag, and we were across from the vagina monologues. And the girl who was, their representative said to me, because we were just kind of chatting, and I was a religion major, and she said, oh, so you're studying to hate yourself? And I was like, have you gone to TCU? Have you taken a religion class? Do you know that it's not? So it's, there's no nuance from any. So that was the vagina monologues. Then the table behind us was Baptist Student Ministries. And this pissed me off. Same day, so I will never forget this. Baptist Student Ministries left a business card. It was blue. And they placed it on the blue stripe of our pride flag. I guess so that we wouldn't notice it outright.
Yeah.
I picked it up, and it was an invitation to come to their Bible study. And it's like, we just can't win, can we? There's no, I guess it kind of felt like there's no, not at TCU, because, the religion department, half of them were disciples ministers, and the other half were, contemplative, not actually happen, but,
Yeah.
just so liberal, which a lot of the conservative students took issue with because Intro to New Testament was not a Bible study class. That's something else that Becca did relied on was, if you're not Christian, you're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a liberal, just a lot of mutually, you can't be Christian and Democrat. You can't,
Yep.
If you want to be Christian, you have to, do it our way. And so, it's not, I'm not the only person who is both progressive and knowledgeable in religious texts, but
right.
I do like to say I have the best opinions. But it's because, you got to err on the side of compassion and love.
Exactly.
And so, as long as that's your baseline, truly your baseline, you can't go wrong. And so, because I'm not a militant atheist and because I know how to avoid all of their, thought traps, I just really wish I had this, platform to call them all out because, once you incorporate religion into your public policy, you're not immune from any kind of criticism. And I just wish I could make a living just outlining every single reason why these people are wrong, because they are. Yeah. And they're liars. And they will, bristle if an atheist says that to them, but I know their text inside and out. I know all their tricks. I know all their games. And I know they're wrong. I know they're lying. So, but yeah, Ken Paxton, wanting to know everyone, they want the addresses of people whose gender doesn't match their birth certificate. And it's ugly. It's ugly. I don't know where he's going to go with that. I have an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Of what the end result of this is going to be, but it's so ugly. And I am white, I'm straight passing, and I am cisgendered. And I know their tricks. But, I just want to be a sophist. That's just where I've landed after all of this, after, Abeka and public high school and my time at college. And it's just, I just need to live on the outskirts of society and just mock. But you don't get paid to do that.
No.
It's so ugly. Everything that there's nothing else you can do at this point but mock it, because nothing else is. As far as I'm concerned, that's all you can do. If you come to them
with a reasoned response, like, I've had friends or family members post things on Facebook, and I will, against my better judgment, get into the comments and be like, well, because of XYZ, I don't think that the statement you're trying to make here is an accurate statement, or I feel like you are missing some nuance or something. And you put together these really well thought out, not so much arguments, but just statements. And it is taken as this horrible offense. And you just need to learn to respect their beliefs. And it's like, but your own holy book,
there's nothing in it to respect.
Is conflicting with you. Like, it says this right here.
It's just not sustainable. And
no. Granted, they have somehow sustained it for like 1,300 years, but that was mostly because of feudal political systems.
The institutional church has been bastardized from the beginning because it was all an attempt to consolidate power. So too with capitalism. In this hyper-capitalist society, this isn't capitalism. This is feudalism. Mm-hmm. Again, you're working for, we, the proletariat, are working for the corporate overlords, and we are not able to break out of it.
No.
Because we are perpetually, indebted to the system that steals and consolidates wealth and power and oppresses those who, the rest of us. And, you know, capitalism is not sustainable. Christian nationalism is not sustainable. None of this can continue. And that's why, you know, I just point to Amos. He was just on the outskirts of, you know, watching the, you know, just the cycle of, you know, you get brought down, then you turn back to God and you build it back up, and then you go back right back to oppressing and seeking power, and it just won't stop until, you know, for Amos it was the Babylonian exile, and I don't know what it's going to be for us, but it's going to be devastating, and I'm going to have my popcorn ready. But you know, it's the, you know, the scourge of the 1980s, which is when all this theology where all this theology was born.
Oh yeah.
You know, it didn't exist in any meaningful form before Ronald Reagan and the economic boom and the conflation of, you know, oh, we're getting all this power and we're doing so well economically. That must, you know, just time, you know, part and parcel with religion. It's absurd. And then you pretend like this has existed for time immemorial.
Right. And this is what kills me. So within the evangelical tradition, they will constantly push that you are to study to show yourself an approved workman to God. However, when people do teach kids how to do Bible study, it's in the most basic format that is basically teaching them to just accept whatever the study Bible or the commentary says and not to actually have any like critical thought about it. One of the things that drew me to Judaism and part of why I've spent such a long time preparing for the official conversion is that study is everything to the Jewish people. It is so tied to that cultural, historical context, that original language that was used. And so we, in our modern times, have to really work to understand all of that and in order to incorporate it into our faith. And I get so irritated with so many of the Christian commentators and influencers that I see, and even a lot of the like mega church pastors and stuff, and the watered down nonsense that they put out and they claim is biblical. But good luck actually having them quote a chapter and verse for you. There's no actual like deep study into it, and it drives me crazy. I'm like, I'm not even in your faith, and I know so much more than you. When I was growing up as a missionary kid, I was kind of expected to know more about the Bible than other kids in Sunday school and stuff. And so I did. I worked really hard to study and to understand, and I was a true believer, man. And so I was very passionate about learning more about the Bible and consuming more and getting a greater perspective on things. And I would see all these kids in my Sunday schools, my youth group, my Awanas, and they were all complaining about studying the Bible and how they didn't want to do it. They just wanted to be a Christian, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but you kind of gotta do that. If you want to know how to follow a religion, you should probably study the Holy Book. Just a thought.
It's a novel idea, I know, but Judaism for me has very little baggage, and I know that's not true for many people who are raised a different flavor of Judaism than I. But, you know, when I did find, you know, Jewish community, and we talk about you have 2 Jews and 3 opinions,
Yes.
and it's like a joke, but that that idea and that kind of academic culture is central to how the Jewish theology was developed, certainly the rabbinic tradition. But I have a fabulous example of Christianity not doing that.
Yes.
Because, don't even get me started on how Christianity just ignores the entire Hebrew Bible except for,
a few smatterings in Leviticus and Song of Solomon and
Jeremiah 29:11. We all know what that says. So
one.
this is my middle school Bible. I have not touched it. So, well, I've touched it just to kind of laugh at my middle school self, but I have not read it in any meaningful way since middle school. But Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper and not harm you, plans for hope and a future. You will call on me and I will listen. You will seek me and you'll find me when you seek me with all of your heart. That's real cute when you just read it on its own, but it doesn't mean much. Certainly does not indicate the original intent and the context of the time in which it was written. You read that and you're like, God has plans for me, to prosper me, to not harm me. And so I feel like a lot of crises of faith are because Christians have this expectation of, prosperity gospel. There's so many different flavors of it. There's the scam kind. And then there's, the well-intentioned kind that's, heavily informed by capitalism and individualism. But what is interesting to me is how these 2 verses, when they were presented to me by Christians, completely devoid of the context and erases the beauty and the meaning. So Jeremiah, I don't remember if he was writing during, probably after, I think maybe the Babylonian exile. I can't remember for the life of me. Certainly after Amos. So kind of like a before and after. And what's interesting to me is that in Amos, there's a text that says, you will call to me, but I will not answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Amos was writing to a people who didn't give a shit about what God thought or what God wanted. And Jeremiah, if you're reading it as maybe an after, before the exile and then after exile, is sort of a, Amos redux, where you've got, Amos saying, God hates your worship. You'll call me and I will not hear you. Versus Jeremiah, whatever. I think 29. Evangelicals call it God's phone number. You will call to me and I will listen. Because there was, in Amos at the end, this, whisper of redemption. And certainly in Isaiah, which is quite rich in, part of it was written before the exile, then after. And there's that, again, that theme of redemption. So God hated your worship. You return and you will seek me and you will find me when you seek with all your heart, which is not what they were doing when Amos was writing. If I could, I wish I knew what passage it was in Amos it's literally directly calling back to, but I can't for the life of me. But that's just, Abeka, it's real cute when there's, little Bible verses, God's phone number, ha, 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 ha. And it's like, you don't know what that means. You don't know. You're really missing out. Oh, found this. Question. What if you wake up tomorrow with only the things you thanked God for today? That was in my Bible. That's what Abeka wanted me to think about. What if I lost things? What if I didn't? So you better thank God or you'll lose it.
Yep.
Just that individualist. It's so damaging.
We were talking about Isaiah, and that was actually one of my favorites. It's got but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. It also has the from the hills from whence cometh my strength.
All right. Let's see. I think one of those is Isaiah 40. See, I remember. I had to do sword drill. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because, Christians, conservative Christians, they really like those texts. Mm-hmm. They really like the idea of soaring on wings like eagles, and those who hope in the Lord. And it's like, they like these verses, but they don't know what it means to hope in the Lord. They're looking at the Bible through a capitalist nationalist lens.
Yes.
It is sick. It's broken. It will never get better until something major changes.
Now, one of my best examples of this is that during the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, there were a number of churches and prominent pastors who would give biblical references to support slavery. And then, let's see,
Bob Jones University in the 70s.
Right. And so then 50 years later, in Bob Jones University history textbook, they still say that the Civil War was over states' rights. And so they gloss over how the Christian religion was used to oppress and to harm people. They will not own that. And, there's so much that happens in deconstruction that is about taking responsibility and taking accountability for what you believe and how you conduct yourself in your life. And while the evangelical crowd will say that they do a lot of that, it really doesn't feel like it, because there doesn't seem to be empathy. Like they just cannot seem to have true compassion for someone who is in a different situation than they are. They then later get into that same situation and suddenly, oh, we get it now. But it has to happen to them in order for them to get that compassion. And I feel like that is the biggest blinders on the message of Jesus Christ ever. Because it is all about understanding other people and walking with them, not condemning them. And they love to pull up that verse that's, Jesus came not to make peace, but to drive a wedge between family members and stuff. And they'll I'm pretty sure that's Pauline. But, they hang on to those things that, oh, well, we're supposed to rebuke one another and we're supposed to, convict people of their sin. And I'm like, actually, it's the Holy Spirit that is supposed to convict people of their sin. That has nothing to do with you.
Amos is big mad. You trample on the poor. You take from them their grain and you build the houses of stone. But guess what? You're not going to get to live in them. Everything that you've built up, you will lose. And there's this final plea that Amos makes that says, please, just do what I say. Just love good, hate evil, and you can avoid all of this. But Amos, it's really rich literarily. And there's a cycle of you build it up and then you get brought down, and you build it up and you get brought down 7 times until God just says, I hate your festivals. I despise your worship. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. And I just think of all the rallies that these far right pastors, I'm not even talking about the politicians who bring their religion into it.
Yeah.
They're politicians. They're going to do what they're going to do. And if there's a God will deal with them.
Right.
Whatever. But the pastors who are upholding this, and they're solid. I get March for Life rally, or no, not March for, it's the one that's anti-abortion.
Yeah.
And, their thoughts and prayers after a shooting. And I really take comfort in the idea that God wants no part of that.
Yeah.
Which is why I just have to hope that there's something true about this, because I'll be a nihilist like that. There's even a part in Amos where the priest of the house of Israel is ignoring the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, these days it has just these far right Christians. Someone wrote a book saying that Trump was the Messiah.
Yes.
That is mind blowing. How have you gotten from even the just normal conservative Christianity? Yeah, you idolize capitalism, but Jesus. And I just have to think there is one way that happens. And it is just, it's the slow burn of idolizing capitalism, idolizing nationalism, I also just look at, I'm in one breath, I'm shocked. And also I recognize that this is the only outcome
mm-hmm.
of this kind of idolatry. This is the only natural conclusion, is that whoever has provided the power. It used to be Jesus whenever they instituted the church. That's how they got the power, because of whichever Charlemagne, I don't remember which one, Constantine converted.
Yes.
They got their power through that. But at least it was Jesus, I guess. There was a chance. But, as soon as power gets a hold of the teachings in the Bible, I mean, there's just no good that can come from that. There is no fruit that can come from that is good and of God. And it's shocking. It's really shocking. But oh yeah, okay, here it is. I wrote Amos is it was written during the dual kingdoms time. They'll seek, but they will not find. And then Jeremiah was in the exile. They will seek and they will find when they seek in earnest. Okay, here it is. They will want, it's Amos 8. The time is surely coming when I will send a famine, not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but of hearing the word of the Lord. They will wander from sea to sea and from north to east. They will run to and fro, seeking the word of the Lord, and they won't find it. That was Amos 12. That is a literary parallel to Jeremiah. They're missing that. They're missing, you want to, you want prophecy. That's prophecy. That's the result of all of this.
So the ones that get me in this context is that now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. And that is encapsulated white Christian nationalism.
Yes.
And
that was, what's that, Ezekiel?
Yeah, Ezekiel 16:49.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have, when it comes to these preachers that are absolutely perverting what it is to be a Christian and live a Christian life. And you have, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And it gives me some hope that there will be a moving of God to give some recompense to these people that are doing this stuff, and maybe in the afterlife, if not now. But when you're looking at they always talk about the fruit of your faith, and the fruit of of what you're doing. And I see a difference between people who are actually making good fruit, and then you have so many that are talking about good fruit but are truly the fig tree. And
Yes.
it did not fulfill the God designed purpose. And that God designed purpose is to frickin' love people.
The way they read the book of Jonah, I keep saying they. I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush, but when I say they, I mean the Christian nationalists, the one
Right.
who have ruined this country at this point, the Jerry Falwells of the world. So when conservative Christians talk about Jonah, I find, well, one, I remember when I really, really read it, I was shocked to learn that the whale is not the point.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's real cute imagery, right? There, nursery decor, Jonah and the whale, oh, big, big whale. No, it's a big fish. And then you think that you know a lot about the Bible because you know that Eve didn't eat an apple. It was just a, fruit. And then, Jonah was a big fish, not a whale. And it's like, okay, wow, semantics. Jonah ran away from what God intended for him. So don't you run away from what God intends for you. And it's like that means nothing. One, it's not what it was about. Not what it's about at all. Because I think the conservative Christians would be shocked at the ending of Jonah if they would read it. Because the story, you and I know, we, actually read the Bible, that the story goes that Jonah's told to go to Nineveh and he runs away. And the big fish, that's just a point of humor because this is a comedic text. He gets spit out of the big fish and Jonah goes to Nineveh. Mm-hmm. But that's not where the story ends.
No.
But, you wouldn't know that based on the general interpretation of conservative Christians of Jonah. So Jonah goes to Nineveh, yes. And he says one sentence. Because Jonah is real mad that God is willing to save Nineveh. Jonah is furious that these people that he thinks are terrible and undeserving are going to be the recipients of God's grace and mercy. Mm-hmm. Can't stand it. So he goes and he says, 40 days, y'all are going to go down. And he's like, all right, I did it. I told him that God was going to judge him. There we go. Now what's going to happen? They're going to ignore me, right? Because, I just told him that God's going to get real mad at him. And that's still not the end.
Yes.
He goes and he, purposefully does a bad job. It's like when my wife tells me to do the dishes, tells me to do the dishes, and I'm like, oh, yeah, see, I can't do it. No, that's a joke. I do it to the best of my ability. It's just not good enough. But, he goes and purposefully does a bad job, and he's like, they're not going to turn to God. And then they do.
Yes.
Because they care about the consequences of their actions. They're told, not in any meaningful way,
yeah,
by Jonah, that there will be a judgment. And they care that there will be a judgment. So they repent. And Jonah is pissed because that's not supposed to happen. Because that's not who he thinks God is.
Yeah.
And so it's funny to me because there's probably 3 different layers and ways that you can read Jonah. So like there's the incomplete way, which is Jonah shirked what God had intended, ran away, but, ended up, getting swallowed by a whale and had to go to Nineveh. So don't you shirk what God has for you. And that's just, well, that is a bad interpretation that provides license for people to just, it's not put words in God's mouth, but it's to, there's no personal conviction involved in that reading. It's whatever you think God intends for you, and that just gives you a license to do it.
Right.
And that's really irresponsible. So then there's the second layer. We, the reader, are Nineveh. We are the ones who are living in sin, and we're the ones who need to repent. Sure.
Yeah.
Not wrong.
No.
But I think the deepest and truest in my humble opinion, is we are Jonah. But we're the ones who think that no matter what we do, God is on our side, and we have license to, we just think we're so right, and we can't stand the people that we think are wrong, and we have to. And I know that sounds like I'm being hypocritical, because I am condemning conservative Christians, but I think for me this text is it's a nice attitude adjustment, because like I said, the God of Amos is one that I really hope exists, and the God of Jonah is one I really hope exists, because I recognize that though I think I am a little bit more on the money than the Jerry Falwells of the world, I in Enneagram 9 wing 8 need to recognize that being combative is not the best way to be. And,
right.
I have my opinions and beliefs on the people who I think are theologically wrong. And I use it as a check and balance to make sure that I am leaving room for the hope of redemption.
Yes.
For the people that I can't stand, and the people that I think are just so egregiously wrong, there's no way to get out of it.
Yeah.
I think Jonah can be a really challenging text, no matter who we, the reader, need to recognize who we are in the story. And I guess it depends on where you are in your religious construction or deconstruction. You need to figure out, who do you have a beef with? Who do you think is beyond redemption? Do you think you yourself are beyond redemption? If so, you might be the people of Nineveh. And it's a very hopeful story if that's who you are. But I think most of us are probably Jonah. It just depends on who we think the irredeemable is.
Be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
And I just think it's really a bummer for Christian nationalists who just don't have that type of religious persuasion. They just don't have that interest in developing, and that just sucks.
Yeah,
and it'll be the downfall.
You weren't specifically homeschooled, so you don't necessarily have that direct experience of being a homeschool child, but you have been exposed to a lot of the same materials that we are given. So when it comes to looking forward at, homeschooling is never going to go away. It's been around since the dawn of time, and it will probably be with us forever. But what do you think are some ways that we can work to ensure that kids are not getting these god-awful perversions of our history and our science and the root and nature of our language?
I think it is tough in, the context of homeschooling. The reason conservative Christians and evangelical Christians make up 3/4 of who homeschools because they don't want outside influence. And it is really unfortunate that I think even now a lot of kids who get homeschooled and grow up homeschooled, they're just not going to have access to the outside ideas, whether it's because they have limited social circles, they have, limited internet access. But we do live in a world where the internet and smartphones and all these, tools are becoming pretty ubiquitous here in the United States. And I think it is just so important that kids and teenagers have access to the internet. I know it's a hot take. Actually, might be a hot take because, the internet is dangerous.
Yes.
I wasn't a Tumblr kid, but I've heard stories. But my partner and I have talked about this just because, we're both on Fundy Snark and, we see what happens when you don't have access to outside resources. So having the internet is, access to blogs and access to, commentaries. And I know that, my everything, in high school changed when, one Google, why is homosexuality wrong or right? Why is it okay for women to be pastors? And that just opens up a whole world of, I found Justin Lee, who started like Gay Christian Network. And that was, I do think that mode of talking about queer issues in the church is outdated. Because I just think at this point there is no room for anything other than unconditional welcome. But through that I found Rachel Held Evans, and
what's funny is that you'll have so many of these parents that are like, oh, they can't have the internet, they're just going to look at porn and pedophiles are going to come after them. But when you talk to actual homeschoolers about the things that they do online, it is almost always entirely innocent, looking for information, just trying to get additional sources with alternate perspectives. And what's crazy is that I almost think that these parents fear that more than porn, and they're just kind of using the porn as a cover.
Very well could be, but you know what else? We could have a whole entire other conversation on purity culture, where simultaneously 12-year-olds have no sexuality and have no need to learn of anything other than cis straight normativity, but also are so afraid of the insane hypersexuality of the teenager. And it's like, pick a narrative. We've been talking this whole time about the scourge of capitalism and the scourge of the idolatry of Christian nationalism. But get me on here again and we'll talk about the scourge of purity culture.
Yes.
And how that ruins lives. But if you don't instill the fear, that won't be the inclination.
Yes. The harder you try to not think about an elephant, the more you're going to think about an elephant.
Anything outside of the hope of a better world, and in Judaism, it's tikkun olam, and I abide by far more than anything else. But in Christianity, it's realized eschatology. And what is closer to the nature of God? What is more, the reign of God, the kingdom of God? Is it a society where everyone is loved and cared for and welcome, and, power structures have been dismantled? Or is it what Ken Paxton does and what Lauren Boebert talks about? The God of Jerry Falwell is not a God I will ever believe in.
Exactly.
Ever. And I think to perpetuate a narrative of God, that is blasphemous.
Yes.
That is sin.
Well, because you've got the conservative movement is all about exactly that: conserving, maintaining the status quo, reinforcing what we have been saying. But they fail to realize that, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Heraclitus said that you never step in a moving river twice. It's always a different river when you step in. And so the process of trying to fight change and trying to fight evolution is a losing battle. And so they end up using these extreme authoritarian structures in order to force people to do it. Thomas Jefferson said, "Whereas Almighty God hath created the mind free, that all attempts to influence it by temporal punishment or burthens, or by civil incapacitations, tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness, and are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, who being Lord both of body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was his almighty power to do." And these are the people that say our founding fathers intended us to have a Christian nation.
You know, I am a big fan of the Jefferson Bible, but so it gives me a giggle when Christians will say the founding fathers were Christians. Okay, one, no.
They were deists.
But also, but they want to say that the founding fathers were Christians, but that just shows they know nothing.
Correct.
Of Enlightenment era theology. Abeka thinks that they were Christians.
Oh, of course. So did Bob Jones. 100%.
Yeah.
ATI, same thing. But there's another quote, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but basically said that it does not matter to me if my neighbor says there are no gods or there are 20 gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. And that's the kind of melting pot inclusiveness that I would like to see today. You know, that recognizing that gay couple over there that like to go to a drag show, they're not picking your pocket or breaking your leg. That woman over there who, completely separate from your world, happens to have an abortion. It does not pick your pocket. It does not break your leg. She is doing things for her life, or their life. They are acting in their own life, and they are making those decisions for themselves. And they just seem to hate this concept of allowing people to have a varied experience. And I've talked with people about inclusive laws versus exclusive laws. And I don't know if that's an actual legal thing. It's just what I came up with. But, you know, you have the laws that are built on whatever is illegal is what the most liberal person would say is illegal, what the most allowable thing would be. And then the Christians want to come in and change politics to where it is the strictest interpretation that governs the laws. And so we end up with these exclusive laws instead of inclusive laws. So they're exclusive of any other belief systems or thought processes, and we need laws that are inclusive because we have a number of, we don't even have to get to the non-Christians. Even within the Christians, we have such a wide diaspora of belief. And this idea that we need to make it illegal to be anything but the most strict Christian is wild to me, because that is excluding so many other Christians. And here's why they do that. They want to make themselves special. They want to say that I am God's special child and I know what he thinks better than everybody else. And so my way of living is the only way to live. And they love getting up on their high horse, and they get their fans and their congregations, and Fox News will tell them that they're so right. And, you know, how could anyone live such a heathen life that it is not your super strict interpretation of the Bible?
Evangelicalism teaches you that this world isn't your home, and the way the conservatives interpret that is, well, you know, we take everything from this world. We hoard money, and wealth and power and resources. You know, this world isn't our home, so who cares how we leave it?
Yeah. It's the Stephen Hassan's bite model of authoritarian control. So we have the behavior control, information control, thought control and emotional control.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are looking at evangelical homeschoolers, the vast majority fall under at least a couple of these categories. Because we
Mm-hmm.
have the parents influencing behavior by saying you can only be friends with these church kids or these homeschool kids and not allowing them to get to know
Yep.
anybody else. Limiting extracurricular activities to things like Awanas or homeschool co-op sports days and things like that. Then you have the information control. And this is where you have these highly specific curriculum that
Mm-hmm.
are, especially if we're looking at like Bob Jones, ATI, Abeka, Pathways, some of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're very limited in the information that they give people.
Right.
And on top of that, these kids are discouraged from reading books that might have, say, an evolutionary perspective or watching a movie about climate change. They are going to be limited in the amount of information that they are allowed to access. And that keeps them under that
Mm-hmm.
behavior control because they don't know anything different. And so they're like, oh, I guess this is how it's supposed to be. And then you have.
It goes so deep too.
Mhm.
So I would argue, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No, you're
off.
good. You're
I
good.
just got excited. So I would argue that, particularly with the school I went to, that is but an extension of homeschool co-op, because in public schools, dirty public schools, they kind of require that teachers have a degree and certification in the subject they teach. And in the private school I went to, I had, of course, I had multiple teachers, and some of them were qualified. Certainly, my math teachers were, because we didn't use Abeka for math after 6th grade, because, like I said, Abeka doesn't believe in higher order math. So my math teachers were always certified in math, and I will hand it to the school I went to. I'm pretty sure everyone who taught, almost everyone had a college degree. Certainly the elementary schoolers did.
Yeah.
But that the bar's in hell. But in 8th grade, 7th or 8th grade, it really blurs together because
Yeah.
it was the same group. I had one teacher who taught history, science, English, and Bible. You want to know what her certificate was in? Physical education.
Of course.
And I would get in trouble because I had a penchant for correcting. And I remember I had this teacher who taught everything but what her certificate was in.
Yeah.
We were in history. This 8th grade had to have been. Anno Domini means your AD stood for after death. No, it doesn't. It stands for Anno Domini. She said, well, that means after death. And I said, no, it doesn't. It means year of our Lord. And she said, well, I don't speak Hebrew. And I said it's Latin. Okay. And it's like the brain rot of this kind of severely, in the words of Jill P.M., lacking in education, that you make it that far in life. The rot is so deep, and wanting the desperation to cling to this lie.
I mean, that's why when I was doing the denominational videos, when I wanted to know about the beliefs of a particular sect, I wasn't going to Wikipedia, I wasn't going to Britannica, I wasn't looking at these secular or mixed sources. I was going directly to their creeds, their confessions, their statements of faith, their video sermons that they had on their website, because you just can't get it from a completely outside perspective. You have to understand it from the way that they are applying it, because you need their interpretation their practical application, their liturgy, in order to really appropriately understand it. And there's not enough curiosity like that to where people are willing to put themselves in the shoes of someone who believes differently from them. So there's almost this cultivated desire to move away from curiosity and trying to get more information. And it's this cultural thing that we have put together to where, you know, they'll say things when you're growing up, like test things against the spirit and, you know, work out your faith with fear and trembling and stuff like that. That sounds like they want you to be curious and they want you to go looking. But then as soon as you start asking dangerous questions, it's suddenly a problem.
Whenever they say things like test it against the spirit, that's not an invitation to critically analyze. That means test it against the doctrine that we've told you.
Correct.
That doesn't mean test it against the nature of God, or it does, but they've been lied to about the nature of God. I just feel like my experience was best case scenario.
Yeah.
You know, and that sucks. Because I had a hard ass time coming out of all of it. It really sucks that it is so difficult to come to the conclusion that the bottom line is love and redemption. We've just strayed so far.
Yes.
It's mind-blowing, and it sucks because it makes me feel really, it does feel hopeless in a way that anything can improve, that, you know, there will be accountability and responsibility for educating children in these conservative Christian families. It feels hopeless because if best case scenario is what I went through, that sucks.
Yeah. And the other part of the bite model that I think really applies in a lot of these very, very strict conservative homeschool families is the emotional control. Because, you know, whether you are following the pearls and doing blanket training and believe that babies are manipulative and sinful, or to believe that children should be 100% obedient 100% of the time without being told a reason for the rules that are being placed on them, there is so much to say. And I mean, we even get this as an adult. We're like, you know,
the heart is deceitful above all things.
Right. And we're like, okay, this sucked. And we get told, oh, well, you had this good thing, so you shouldn't be upset about this. And there's so much toxic positivity that, you know, you're supposed to be filled with the joy of the Lord all the time. And that means you're never sad and you're never mad and you're just happy all the time. And it really embodies that Jefferson quote where it results in hypocrisy and resentment. You know, this is why millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're moving away from the church because we're tired of being gaslit. We're tired of being demanded to be these weird little Stepford children and not allowed to actually be who we are. And what is sad about that is that if you take the evangelical Christian view of God at its face value, he built every one of us for an individual, unique purpose. And if we all have a unique purpose, why would we be carbon copies of each other? There is a purpose to uniqueness. There is a purpose to differences in perspectives. There is a purpose to all of that is godly, that is holy. And yet we shut people down from experiencing or sharing that holy and godly uniqueness by adhering to completely arbitrary standards. It's so wild because we see so much in Fundy Snark where these people need mental health care,
Yeah.
and yet they just wrap it up in Jesus and, oh, I've been feeling really sad. That means I'm not clean to God enough. And there's so much of this, because I'm a Christian, yes, I'm going to be persecuted all the time, but I should be happy all the time and not have any concerning negative feelings about anything. And that's
They're
just not how
persecuting
it
themselves
works.
at this point. And it's like, if it, face value, it's you're persecuting yourselves. You're doing it to yourselves. Like, that's kind of a joke, but also they're harming themselves. They're harming their own. None of us are hurt by, well, yes, we are, fundamentally, but I mean, I feel it where I am at my juncture. I'm not hurt by that. They're hurting their own kids. They're hurting their own churches. They're not hurting liberals. They're not hurting me, a gay. They're hurting their gay children. They're hurting their trans children. Their baby girls. They're doing it to themselves.
Yep. Because of colonization, Christianity has become somewhat ubiquitous pretty much anywhere you go. There are certain countries that are primarily Muslim or well, to the evangelicals, there's tons of countries where people are Catholic, and that's not okay. So,
1040 window.
Yeah.
Are you familiar? That was a big thing at my school. The 1040 window, and they're the ones that need. It's funny because part of the 1040 window is all the Catholic countries in the Western Hemisphere, but the lengths they will go to convince themselves that they are persecuted here in America, because you know what? I believe it is true that Christians are persecuted in countries. Yes, that happens, but that's not you.
So early 2000s, when I'm fresh out of college and I am beginning my deconstruction, they had, online message boards and stuff. And I would get into these Christian message boards and try to talk to them about soteriology and eschatology and the exegesis of the clobber passages and things. And they wouldn't even discuss the actual text or the context. All they wanted to do was go, oh, so you're a gay, right? Okay, well, you've got a demon and you need to find a deliverance ministry. And I got so much hate, not even for admitting that I was gay, just to put forward this possible interpretation that is welcoming and inclusive of people rather than condemnation. And I will admit, I definitely let it get the better of me at the time. Like, I at the time had some rage issues. I had undiagnosed bipolar. And so I know I was not the best version of myself. And I'm sure that the statements and arguments that I put forward were not the best worded that I can do. And I would end up literally like typing and screaming at the screen because I was so enraged by how awful these people were being. And while it's completely valid to feel that way, I was in a way harming myself because I kept going in for more and kept trying to be like, I gotta prove myself right. I have to prove them all wrong. The world is not going to be okay until I have proved them all wrong. Mm-hmm. And that is just not a sustainable concept within deconstruction. because it absolutely does reach a point of self-harm.
Yes, exactly. That
And
is
so,
that is a really good way to describe it. And I've heard that in the past, because the first time I heard, the term digital self-harm, I thought, in my early college days, I used to really enjoy reading Matt Walsh's tweets because they would make me so mad. And I would just I had the impulse. I was like, I'm going to take him down. But as much as we think it feels good to, own the conserves and, because own the libs, but,
yeah.
that. So, and I suppose it does. Then it just becomes a point where, it's digital self-harm. It's not helping you. It's making you worse. It's making you the worst version of yourself.
Yep.
And wouldn't it be nice if we could all recognize each other's humanity? I wish the likes of Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene would do that. I hope I can do that better.
Well, you know what needs to happen? They need to be on a tour bus and break down in the middle of nowhere in Nevada or something. And then a bus full of drag queens comes by. And because drag queens are very handy, they will fix the bus and get them on their way. And Lauren and Marjorie will have to be like, they helped us?
Oh,
nice.
That's a modern parable, isn't it? Because the parable of the Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, and it's the priest and the Levite passed by, the ones that you would think would be sympathetic to the Jewish man who was beaten up by the, just random That's the other thing about the story that gets me, is the people who do the entering, they're not important. That's not the point of the story.
No.
It's not like, oh, look at these evil, horrible, awful leftists who or Samaritans who beat up this Jew, but then it was also a Samaritan who helped. And so, there's good ones and there's bad ones. No, that's not it. We don't know who thieves. Who were they? We don't know. That doesn't matter. What matters is the response.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the modern parable, is that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert break down and Ted Cruz drives by and, oh, nope, sorry, I got it. It's hot. I'll melt. And then, Donald Trump drives by and he's like, oh, that's funny. I'm a face-eating tiger. I don't actually give a shit about you. And then the drag queens come by. It's a shame that these churches are allowing the politicians who profess some sort of theological alignment are not saying, we don't endorse that. That isn't us. And the only conclusion I am left with is that it is. And there cannot be any sort of meaningful conversation and subsequent change until the churches reckon with what they have become, what they have allowed to transpire.
This is going to be a spicy YouTube video.